Get this black kid out of my courtroom before I have him removed.
Judge Harrison Wakefield didn't even look up. No. Some little ghetto boy in a thrift store suit playing dress-up while real lawyers are trying to work. Bradford Sinclair laughed. The easy laugh of a man with 30 years at the bar and a $4 million firm behind him. He adjusted his gold cufflinks. Your Honor, my client is a respected developer. He doesn't have time for affirmative action theater. The boy in the oversized navy suit didn't flinch. 13 years old. His grandmother's only lawyer. Your Honor, with respect, I'm admitted to practice. We're ready to proceed. Admitted to what? Middle school. Sit down before you embarrass that old woman behind you. Behind Ulisses, Ulisses Daniels, 78, the woman who raised him, pressed a wooden cross into her palm. The clock read 9,043. To understand what was about to happen in that courtroom, you have to walk back 3 weeks back to a small kitchen on the corner of Maple Heights, where a 13-year-old boy was already awake at 4 in the morning, ironing a suit that had belonged to a dead man. The suit had been his uncle's. The kitchen had been built by his great-grandfather, and the framed Juris Doctor certificate hanging above the toaster had been earned in full by Ulisses Daniels, age 12, the previous spring. Ulisses Daniels had taught reading at Maple Heights Elementary for 41 years before she retired. When her son and his wife died in a car accident, leaving a 5-year-old boy with nothing but a backpack and a small dictionary, Ulisses brought him home and started over. By 6, Ulisses was reading the Constitution. By 8, he was enrolled in an early college program for gifted children. By 12, he had completed his Juris Doctor online from Harrington Law School with the highest honors the program had ever recorded. Local papers called him the boy who reads too much. Elena called him baby. She had not stopped. The house at 1018 Maple Heights had stood on that corner for 50 years. Eleanor's father, Ulisses Daniels, had built it with his own hands in the early 1950s. One of the first black landowners in the county after the Civil Rights Act made such things technically possible. He had also in 1952 sued the Federal Railway Company in this very same county courthouse, defending himself, and won. There was a yellowed newspaper clipping in Eleanor's Bible that proved it. Ulisses had read it once when he was 9. He had not forgotten a word. The trouble had started 6 months earlier. A man named Reginald Hollister, chief executive of Hollister Heritage Holdings, the kind of developer who shook hands at charity galas on Mondays and crushed elderly homeowners by Tuesday, had announced plans for a luxury-gated community called Maple Heights Reserve. Every other neighbor on the block had sold or settled. Only Eleanor refused. She had called 14 law firms in the county. 3 of them hung up the moment she said the name Hollister. Her own attorney, Margaret Whitfield, had taken the case for 2 months, and then the week before the hearing had quietly withdrawn, citing a conflict of interest. Off the record, her hands had been shaking when she signed the paperwork. That left Eleanor alone, 78 years old, with 1 week to find a lawyer who wasn't afraid of Reginald Hollister. There wasn't one. So Ulisses did what he had done every time the world told his grandmother no. He went to the kitchen table. He opened his laptop and he drafted a petition to the state Supreme Court requesting a limited special practice waiver permission to represent a single family member in a single case despite being too young to sit for the bar exam. He attached letters from Dean Beatrice Holloway and 3 professors at Harrington Law. He attached a simulated bar exam he had taken voluntarily on which he had scored higher than 95% of graduating law students in the state. He filed the petition on a Tuesday. The court approved it on a Friday. It was the second such waiver in the history of the state. The local paper ran a small piece. Judge Harrison Wakefield read it over coffee. He clipped it. He laughed. The night before the hearing, Eleanor sat on the front porch in her good blue dress watching the street lamps come on. Ulisses came out and sat beside her. He had ironed the navy suit until the cuffs were sharp. The cuffs were still too big. "Baby," she said, "you don't have to do this." He took her hand. "Grandma, this is great-granddaddy's house." She looked at him for a long time. Then she went inside, came back out with a small wooden cross her father had carved during the war, and pressed it into his palm. "You take this with you tomorrow." He took it. The clock on the kitchen wall read 4 in the morning. The suit was already pressed. Day 1 in the courtroom did not go better. Judge Wakefield mispronounced Ulisses' name 3 times in the first 20 minutes. The first time looked like an accident. The second time he did it slower. The third time he smiled while he did it. He had read the petition. He had seen the name in print. He knew exactly how to say it. He chose not to. At the plaintiff's table, Bradford Sinclair's two associates and a paralegal sat with the body language of men watching a dog do a trick. They snickered. They whispered. When Ulisses stood to address the court, Sinclair physically turned his chair so that his back was to the defendant's table. He kept it there for 9 minutes. From the gallery behind Eleanor, a man in a sport coat leaned forward and said, just loud enough to carry, "Where are this boy's parents?" Eleanor lowered her head and did not lift it again until the recess. During the short break, Wakefield did not retreat to chambers. Instead, he walked to the wooden railing near the front bench where a colleague named Bill Henderson was watching from the first row and spoke at a volume he knew would carry. "I've seen a lot in 34 years on this bench, Bill. But a black kid in his uncle's suit defending his grandma, that's a new one. Whole thing's gonna be over by lunch." Soft laughter rippled through Sinclair's table. Eleanor went very still. A single tear fell, hit the wooden cross in her palm and stayed there. Behind the clerk's desk, Court Clerk Nathaniel Brooks, a black man in his early 60s, 3 years on the job and 28 years in this courthouse before that, turned his face away. He did not laugh. He opened a small drawer beneath the bench. He reached past the official log and pulled out a thin, well-worn notebook of his own. He wrote down the time. He wrote down the words exactly as Wakefield had said them. He wrote down the name of every person within earshot. The page he was writing on was not page 1. It was page 142. Ulisses heard everything. He did not turn his head. He only pressed his fist against the underside of the table until his knuckles went white. When court resumed, Sinclair came out swinging. He produced a document, Exhibit A, and presented it to the bench with the satisfied air of a man laying down a winning card. It was titled Land Transfer Agreement. It claimed Eleanor Daniels had sold her family home to Hollister Heritage Holdings 3 years prior for $50,000. The actual market value was approximately 12 times that. Eleanor stared at the document. Her hands trembled. "I don't remember signing this." "I don't?" "I would remember." Wakefield did not look at the paper. "Memory fades, ma'am. Documents don't." He had decided before he sat down. Sinclair pressed his advantage. He called Ulisses young man in the tone people use for boy. He suggested with an oily smile that the defendant go sit with his grandmother and let the adults work. 3 minutes before the morning gaffle, he dropped a 200-page motion on the defendant's table. A deliberate ambush meant to drown a child in paper. Ulisses asked Wakefield for a continuance. Just 24 hours to review. Wakefield denied it without looking up. He wanted to play attorney counselor. The clock waits for no one, not even for boys with big titles. The stakes were not abstract. Eleanor had checked her savings book on the bus ride that morning. The balance read $3,184. She had folded it carefully and put it back in her purse. The deed to the house was the only real asset she had left. In the tool shed behind the kitchen, her late husband Howard's tools were still wrapped in clean cloth. She had not opened the box in 16 years. She still dusted it every month. Maple Heights Elementary was the only school district Ulisses had ever attended. It was also one of only 3 school districts in the state with a dual enrollment program for gifted children that allowed law school continuation. If Eleanor lost the preliminary ruling on the contract's authenticity, the eviction would proceed in 30 days. Then came the coffee. During the second short recess, a young associate from Hollister's table, paper cup in hand, passed close behind Ulisses and bumped his elbow against the boy's shoulder. Coffee splashed across the front of the navy suit, soaking through the cuff and onto the briefing book on the table. Sinclair, standing nearby, laughed. "At least it's not the bench, kiddo. Run home and have your grandma wash it." Ulisses did not look up. He pulled a paper napkin from his briefcase, dabbed the stain, and reopened the file. In the back row, a local reporter named Sarah Mitchell raised her phone and quietly took a photograph. The shot would be on the desk of her editor within 24 hours. He would set it aside. He would say only one word. "Wait." Ulisses asked for the bathroom. Inside, the boy in the oversized suit set both hands on the rim of the sink and looked into the mirror. He did not cry. He did not breathe heavily. He only looked. A man came in pushing a cleaning cart, black around 60, the kind of quiet that fills a room more than noise. He saw the coffee on Ulisses' sleeve. He did not speak. He reached into the breast pocket of his work shirt, pulled out a clean white handkerchief that had been ironed flat that morning, and held it out. Ulysses took it. In the corner of the cloth, 4 letters were stitched in pale blue thread. H.E. Walker, 1968. The man, Henry Walker, the courthouse janitor, a Marine who had come home from Vietnam and never quite stopped working, nodded once and pushed his card out the door. Ulysses dabbed his sleeve. The stain stayed. He kept the handkerchief. When he walked back to the defendant's table, Eleanor leaned over and whispered, "Baby, it's okay. We can find another house. You shouldn't have to carry this." Ulysses did not answer. He laid the handkerchief flat on the table beside his briefing book like a small white flag that meant the opposite of surrender. That night, on the front porch at 1018 Maple Heights, Eleanor brought out a chipped enamel teapot and sat down beside her grandson. The street lamp buzzed. Crickets sang. The wooden swing built by Ulisses Daniels in 1953, the year before he won his railroad case, creaked softly under their weight. Eleanor took a long breath. Then she told Ulysses a story he had heard parts of, but never all of. In 1952, your great-grandfather sat in that exact same courtroom, same wood paneling, same kind of judge. They told him a black man couldn't keep a parcel of land that big. Said the railroad needed it more than he did. He didn't have a lawyer, couldn't afford one, so he walked in by himself. 3 days, he stood there. 3 days. She unfolded the yellowed newspaper clipping from her Bible. The photograph showed a tall man in a frayed collar shirt with a crooked tie standing at a defendant's table that did not even have a microphone. They said to him, "Mr. Daniels, you don't belong in this room." And you know what he said back? He said, "Your Honor, this land belongs to us. So today this room belongs to me too." Ulysses looked at the photograph for a long time. He looked at his great-grandfather's collar. He looked at the cuffs of his own jacket draped over the railing. The coffee stain had dried into a dark crescent on the sleeve. The 2 men, 3 generations apart, were wearing the same suit. He did not say anything, but when Eleanor went inside to wash up, he stood, walked to his bedroom, and pulled out a blank notebook. On the first page in pencil, he wrote, "They called me a black kid in my uncle's suit. Tomorrow they'll call me counselor, or they'll wish they had." Then he got on his bicycle and rode 40 minutes across town to the office of Margaret Whitfield. Margaret would not see him. The receptionist told him so 3 times. He sat on the curb outside her building for 4 hours, thumbing through a copy of the county civil code he had brought in his backpack. At nearly 7 in the evening, the lights in the office went off. The front door opened. Margaret stepped out, briefcase in hand, and stopped when she saw him. She looked at him for a long, painful moment. "You shouldn't be here, kid." "Ma'am, I just need to know one thing off the record. Did Hollister threaten you?" Margaret looked up and down the empty sidewalk. Her face went tight. "They didn't threaten Lee. They threatened my firm, which is the same thing. I have 2 children to put through college. I'm sorry. I am genuinely deeply sorry." She started to walk past him. Then she stopped, reached into her purse, and pulled out a small piece of paper. She pressed it into his hand. That name. He retired 6 years ago. Used to run the county records archive. If anyone in this county can tell you whether that contract is real, it's him. They tried to break me, kid. Don't let them break you. The paper said Walter Ashbury, 4/2012 Sycamore. That night, Ulysses began the hardest 48 hours of his short life. The University Law Library at 2 in the morning bent over the Notary Commission database, a stack of certified records growing on the desk beside him. Cup after cup of cold coffee, a photocopier humming in the dark. He typed the name Cornelius Patterson into the database and felt his pulse quicken. His grandmother packed a paper bag lunch and tucked a note inside. The note was written in green chalk, the same chalk she had used to teach first grade for 41 years. It said, "Stand tall. Speak true." We recorded mock cross-examinations on his phone. He played them back. He cringed at the way his voice cracked. He recorded again 38 times. He learned to drop his voice, half an octave. He learned to pause at the start of every question so that nobody could tell whether the boy or the man was about to speak. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror for an hour practicing posture. Square the shoulders, lift the chin, hands flat on the table, never clenched. At dawn the next day, he rode his bicycle to 412 Sycamore and knocked on a peeling green door. Walter Ashbury opened it. Late 70s, grey beard, eyes like a man who had read too many old documents and trusted very few of them. They sent a child to my door. Ulysses stood very straight. Sir, my name is Ulisses Daniels. I'm 13 years old. I hold a Juris Doctor from Harrington Law School and a limited special practice waiver from the Supreme Court of this state. I am defending my grandmother in Hollister versus Daniels. I'm here because Margaret Whitfield said you might be the only honest man in this county who could help me. Walter Ashbury stared at him for 5 seconds. Then his shoulders dropped half an inch. Well, son, now be damned. Come in. The walls of his small front room were covered with black and white photographs. Walter, very young in marine dress blues, standing beside another young marine, a black man with the same kind of straight-back stillness Ulysses carried. Korea, Walter said, watching the boy notice. He saved my life. I owed him my career. I owe him still. Walter agreed to pull every record he could find on the Daniels parcel. That night, alone in his bedroom, Ulysses tied the cufflinks of his uncle's suit. They were too big and slid down his wrists. He did not adjust them. He folded Henry Walker's handkerchief into a small triangle and slipped it into his breast pocket. He turned out the light. On the desk beside his bed, the note he had written remained in pencil, face up. They called me a black kid in my uncle's suit. Tomorrow they'll call me counselor, or they'll wish they had. The county records archive was in the basement of an old brick building 3 blocks from the courthouse. Walter Ashbury had a key from his retirement and a quiet understanding with a night security guard. He let Ulysses in at 7 in the evening. The lights flickered. The boxes were stacked by decade. What's the notary's name on that contract of theirs? Walter asked, setting down a thermos of coffee. Cornelius Patterson. Walter nodded slowly. He moved with the certainty of a man who had spent 50 years putting paper in boxes and could find any sheet in any year with his eyes closed. He pulled a thin folder from the 3rd row of the 2nd cabinet. He sat it on the metal table between them. The folder said Patterson Cornelius, Notary Commission Records. He opened it. He turned past the commission papers, past the renewal forms, past the address changes. Near the back, he stopped. He slid a single sheet across the table. It was a death certificate. Cornelius Patterson had died on a date that fell 8 months before the date stamped on the land transfer agreement Bradford Sinclair had submitted as Exhibit A. A dead man cannot notarize a deed. Ulysses did not smile. He did not let out a breath. He only opened his notebook and wrote down the date in tight, careful pencil. Then he asked very quietly for a certified copy. Walter made him 3. What else are you going to need, son? The parcel survey number on Exhibit A. Walter pulled out the surveyor's logbook. He ran his finger down the column. He stopped. He ran it down again, to be sure. Then he looked at Ulysses for a long moment. This survey number didn't exist on the date the contract was supposedly signed. The county didn't issue it until a year and 6 months later, 18 months. 2 impossibilities. 1. Forgery. Sinclair's entire case rested on a single piece of paper that contradicted both physics and time. Ulysses sat down on a wooden chair in the basement of that records archive. He laid his hands flat on the metal table the same way he had practiced in the mirror. He breathed out. He could file an emergency motion. He could end the case in the morning. He could walk into Wakefield's chambers with the death certificate and the survey log and demand a dismissal before the next gavel. He chose not to. He opened the notebook. He wrote 1 line in pencil. Let him build the gallows himself. Bigger ones fall louder. Walter read the line over his shoulder. For the first time all evening, the old man laughed. A real laugh, low and full. Son, you remind me of someone I knew in Korea. Most patient man I ever met. Also won every fight he ever picked. Ulysses closed the notebook. He stood up. Then tomorrow, sir, I'd like you to come to court just to listen. I'll call you only if Mr. Sinclair vouches for the contract on the record. Walter nodded. He will, I know. Walter walked Ulysses to the door. As the boy stepped out into the night, the old man put a hand on his shoulder. Your great-grandfather, Ulisses Daniels. Was that my kin to you? Ulysses looked up. My great-grandfather, sir. Walter let the door open another inch, looked at him a long moment, and shook his head slowly with something like wonder. Well, that makes sense. 3 days he stood in that courtroom, son. 3 days. He never once raised his voice. He just told the truth very plainly until the room had to listen. You're going to do the same thing. Ulysses rode his bicycle home through the dark streets. In his backpack, 3 certified copies. In his breast pocket, Henry Walker's handkerchief. In his palm, the wooden cross from Eleanor. The clock in the kitchen read 11:13 at night. He did not sleep. Day 2 in court began the way Day 1 had ended, with Bradford Sinclair speaking as if the boy at the defendant's table were not in the room. Sinclair rose, smoothed his tie, and addressed Wakefield in the rolling baritone he used for closing arguments. Your Honor, in the interest of judicial economy, the plaintiff moves for summary judgment. Mrs. Ball. Daniels's defense is frankly frivolous, sentimental, and embarrassing to all parties. The contract is signed. The transfer is documented. This child, he gestured loosely toward Ulysses without turning his head, is wasting taxpayer time. He should be in algebra class. Wakefield nodded along the way. A man nods at his own thoughts. The court is inclined to agree. Counselor, if I may even use that word, do you have anything to say before this concludes? Ulysses rose to his feet. He had to lift slightly onto the balls of his shoes to bring his hands to the edge of the lectern. He set them there, flat, square shoulders, lifted chin, voice dropped half an octave. Mr. A. Sinclair, can you confirm for the record that Exhibit A is the foundational document on which your entire claim against Mrs. Myers? Daniels rests. Sinclair, mistaking the boy's calm for deference, smiled wide for the gallery. Of course it is, kiddo. It's an open suit transfer. Now, if we can move on. So you, as counsel of record, vouch for its authenticity without reservation. Sinclair gave a small, irritated laugh. Without reservation. May we proceed, Your Honor? In the back of the gallery, Walter Ashbury, who had quietly slipped through the courtroom door 5 minutes earlier, nodded once, just once. Wakefield reached for his gavel. Counsel, I think we've heard enough. The court is inclined to grant the motion for summary. Your Honor, Ulysses had not raised his voice, but it carried. The courtroom went quiet. With respect, I have a single line of questioning that the record requires. 5 minutes. If after those 5 minutes the court remains unmoved, I will yield. Wakefield laughed dryly. 5 minutes. The clock is yours, Counselor. Use them well. Your bedtime is at 9. A few uncomfortable laughs from Sinclair's table. From the gallery, the young law student from the front row did not laugh. She set down her pen. She had come to take notes. She was now watching a lecture she had not been prepared for. Behind the clerk's desk, Nathaniel Brooks turned to a fresh page in his small private notebook, page 143. He wrote down the word bedtime in clear, careful handwriting. He wrote down the time. Ulysses asked the court for permission to call a foundational witness. Sinclair objected. Foundational to what, Your Honor? There is nothing here to foundationalize. Ulysses did not look at Sinclair. He looked directly at Wakefield. He spoke softly with the deliberate clarity of a child who had practiced this exact sentence 38 times into the dark. Foundational, Your Honor, to whether opposing counsel has just perjured himself in this courtroom. The room went still. Wakefield's smile vanished for the first time that morning. He sat back. He sat the gavel down. Witness is allowed. At the plaintiff's table, Bradford Sinclair leaned over and whispered something to his lead associate. The associate's face went the color of paper. Sinclair reached for his gold cufflink, twisted it once, twisted it again. The cufflink popped loose. It rolled silently across the table and stopped against the edge of his briefing book. Sinclair did not pick it up. Walter Ashbury rose from the gallery. Mr. Huppy, Insta. Ashbury, please come forward and be sworn. The bailiff swore him in. Walter Ashbury, 50 years, a county records archivist, grey beard, sea blue eyes, the uniform of an honest man, laid one hand on the Bible and the other on the rail. When he gave his name for the record, he turned his head slightly, very slightly, and looked directly at Judge Harrison Wakefield. Wakefield looked down at his desk. Ulysses began his 5 minutes, but the court would not hear them. Not yet, because at exactly that moment Wakefield slammed his palm on the bench. This court will recess for 30 minutes. Counsel, both of you chambers, now. The hallway outside courtroom B smelled of floor wax and old paper. Ulysses stepped out first. Eleanor was waiting on the wooden bench by the window, her hands folded around her purse, her shoulders very small. He did not get to her. Bradford Sinclair came through the doors 3 steps behind him and cornered him against the wall beside the water fountain. There was no one else in the hall but a janitor pushing a cart at the far end. The cart belonged to Henry Walker. Walker did not stop. He did not look. He pushed slowly. "Listen, kiddo." Sinclair's voice had dropped. "No audience now. No theater. You are in over your head. Way over. Walk this back. Recommend your grandmother accept the settlement. Take the offer. Walk out of here a little hero, and I will personally make sure you get the most prestigious internship in this state when you turn 18. I'll write the letter myself." Ulysses did not answer. "Push this," Sinclair continued, leaning closer, "and I will bury that waiver of yours so deep no court in this country will ever let you practice again. You'll be a footnote, a cautionary tale, a name law professors use to scare children out of trying." He paused. He waited for the boy to flinch. The boy did not flinch. He looked Sinclair in the eye. He did not raise his voice. He did not say anything at all. Then he stepped sideways around him the way you step around a fallen tree and walked toward his grandmother. Behind him, Henry Walker pushed his cart past Sinclair. He did not nod. He did not greet. He simply did not see him. Eleanor reached up as Ulysses approached and pulled him into the bench beside her. Her hand was trembling. "Baby, maybe we should just take the offer." Her voice broke. "You're 13 years old. I don't need you to fight my whole life for me. I had my fight. You should have yours later, not now. Not like this." Ulysses knelt down in front of her the way he had knelt when he was 4 and she had taught him to tie his shoes. "Grandma, baby, Grandma, listen to me." He held her hand in both of his. "Great-granddaddy didn't fight a railroad in 1952, so I would hand his land to a man like that in a hallway to save myself. He stood 3 days in that room. I can stand 5 more minutes." She did not answer with words. She only reached into the breast pocket of his suit, pulled out the small wooden cross her own father had carved, kissed it once, and pressed it back into his palm. Then she folded his fingers around it. He slid it back into his pocket, beside Henry Walker's handkerchief. In the empty courtroom behind the closed doors, Judge Harrison Wakefield sat alone behind the bench, rubbing his temples. Bradford Sinclair stood by the tall window with his back to the room. For the first time in 6 years of practicing in front of this judge, Sinclair loosened his tie before the gavalid returned. Neither of them spoke. Outside in the hallway, Ulysses sat with his grandmother. He did not check his notes. He did not rehearse. He only watched the second hand of the clock above the bench window. It read 10,018, 5 minutes from the doors reopening, 10 minutes from the end of Bradford Sinclair's career, 3 months from the end of Harrison Wakefield's. And nobody in either room, not the judge, not the lawyer, not the boy, not the grandmother yet knew what was coming. A bell rang somewhere in the building. The minute hand moved. The doors of courtroom B opened. Eleanor squeezed her grandson's hand once. Ulysses stood up. "Let's go." The clock on the wall read 10:23. Ulisses Daniels, 13 years old, his grandmother's only lawyer, in a navy suit 2 sizes too big, stood at the lectern, set both hands flat on its edge, and began the 10 minutes that would end Bradford Sinclair. "Mr. Ashbury." Walter Ashbury on the witness stand leaned forward. "Yes, I am placing into evidence Defense Exhibit 1, a certified death certificate from the State Vital Records Office in the name of Cornelius Patterson, the notary whose seal appears on the plaintiff's Exhibit A. Could you please read aloud for the record the name and the date of death?" Walter took the document. He read it slowly, the way an old archivist reads anything that matters. Cornelius Patterson. Date of death 8 months prior to the date stamped on the plaintiff's Exhibit A. A murmur rolled through the gallery. In the back row, the reporter Sarah Mitchell drew a hard line through the words 5-minute case on her notepad and started a new page. At the top of the new page, in capital letters, she wrote "Holy Hell." At the plaintiff's table, Bradford Sinclair did not move. Ulysses gave it 3 seconds. Then he kept going. Defense Exhibit 2, a certified record from the county surveyor's office. Mr. Ashbury, the parcel survey number cited on plaintiff's Exhibit A. When was that survey number first issued? 18 months after the date on the plaintiff's contract, son. Wakefield leaned forward in his chair. The smirk was gone. You were testifying under oath that the survey number on Exhibit A did not exist on the date that the document claims to have been executed. Walter Ashbury met the judge's eyes for the first time. Your Honor, that's not opinion. That is the public record of this county. I oversaw it for 50 years. In the gallery, the black mother from the front rows, the one who had wiped her daughter's tears at the very beginning of all this, stood up. She did not clap. She did not speak. She simply stood holding her daughter against her hip, watching. Ulysses turned slightly. Your Honor, with permission, I would like to redirect a single foundational question to opposing counsel in his capacity as the certifying attorney of Exhibit A. Wakefield, who had not picked up his gavel since the recess, simply nodded. Permission granted. Ulysses did not raise his voice. He did not even change his expression. Mr. Sinclair, less than 30 minutes ago, on this very record, you stated without reservation that Exhibit A is authentic. Would you like to amend that statement now, or after the State Bar reviews this transcript? Sinclair opened his mouth. My office relied on documents provided by the client. That is not what you stated for the record, sir. Ulysses paused just a beat. The way he had practiced. The record reflects unequivocal certification. Do you wish the court reporter to read it back? Sinclair did not answer. His hand drifted to where his gold cufflink should have been. The cufflink was no longer there. It had been on the floor for the last 40 minutes beneath his table, and no one had picked it up. He sat down. Ulysses did not let him breathe. Defense Exhibit 3, a sworn affidavit from Margaret Whitfield, attorney of record for Mrs. Daniels, prior to her withdrawal. The affidavit details on penalty of perjury the campaign of pressure exerted upon her firm by Hollister Heritage Holdings, including emails dated and authenticated that reference the very document we are now discussing. The very document, Your Honor, that has just been demonstrated to be impossible. He laid the affidavit on the bench. Sinclair stood up to object. His voice came out wrong. The first word cracked. Your Honor, I. He could not find the second word. A bead of sweat ran from his temple down to the collar of his white shirt and bloomed into a dark spot. He looked down at his briefing book. He turned a page that meant nothing. He turned another. His lips moved without sound. Behind him, his two associates, without making eye contact with their senior partner, quietly closed their own briefcases. One of them slipped out a phone and began typing under the table. He was texting the firm. Sinclair lowered himself back into his chair. His hands shook so badly he could not button his vest. Sarah Mitchell stood up and walked out of the courtroom. She had to call her editor. The story she had been told to write was no longer the story she was about to file. Ulysses turned very slowly to Judge Harrison Wakefield. He stepped back from the lectern. He did not lift onto the balls of his feet anymore. He stood flat, square, and full. Your Honor, the clock read 10:33. The plaintiff's case rests on a contract notarized by a man 8 months in his grave, referencing a parcel survey number that would not exist for another year and a half, and certified before this court under your eye by counsel who vouched for it without reservation. The defense moves for dismissal with prejudice, and the defense further moves that this matter and Mr. Sinclair personally be referred to the district attorney for criminal forgery and conspiracy review. In the breast pocket of his suit, Henry Walker's handkerchief sat folded into a tight white triangle. In the inside pocket against his ribs, Eleanor's wooden cross. 10 minutes. That was all it took. Judge Harrison Wakefield did not speak for almost a full minute. He looked at the affidavit. He looked at the death certificate. He looked at the survey record. He looked finally at Bradford Sinclair, who could not meet his eyes. And then at last he looked at the boy in the oversized navy suit. Then he did something he had not done in 34 years on the bench. He stood up. The motion to dismiss with prejudice is granted. The court finds plaintiff's Exhibit A facially fraudulent. This matter is referred to the district attorney's office for full criminal review, and Mr. Sinclair is named personally in that referral. He paused. Counselor Daniels. Ulysses lifted his head. The court owes you an apology and, frankly, an education in humility. The room stayed very still. Wakefield did not sit back down. He spoke instead to the gallery, to the reporters in the back row, to the law student, to the mother and her daughter, to everyone who had ever been told to sit down before they had spoken. In 34 years on this bench, I have never witnessed a more thorough or more honest piece of advocacy than what I have just seen. The fact that it came from a 13-year-old should embarrass every adult in this room, myself most of all. Sarah Mitchell, returning at a run from the hallway, slid back into her seat in time to hear it. Her pen flew across the page. She already had a headline: How a 13-year-old Ended a 30-Year Career. Eleanor Daniels stood up from her seat. She did not say a word. She walked slow and steady in her good blue dress to the defendant's table, and she laid her hand against her grandson's cheek. Her thumb brushed the line of his jaw, the way it had brushed it when he was 5. The morning she brought him home. Both of their lives broken in the same place. Ulysses, who would not let his voice break for an entire 2-day hearing, finally let it break now. "Grandma, we kept the house. Great-granddaddy can rest now." She did not answer with words. She reached 2 fingers into the breast pocket of his suit, drew out the small wooden cross her father had carved during the war, placed it gently into the center of his palm, and folded his fingers around it. Then she kissed the top of his head. At the plaintiff's table, Bradford Sinclair was gathering papers with hands that no longer obeyed him. His briefing book slipped out of his grip. The pages spread across the floor in a wide white fan. No one bent down to help him. His associates had already left. 2 reporters approached. He raised one hand to cover his face, pushed the small swinging gate of the bar with the other, and walked. Almost ran out of the courtroom. The photograph that captured him in that doorway, hand over his face, mouth half open, eyes red, would dominate 2/3 of the front page of the Maple County Record the next morning. Beneath it in smaller print, Daniels family keeps home. Hollister Heritage Holdings faces federal probe. Sinclair offers no comment. What followed over the next 6 months was not just a defeat. It was an eraser. Within 48 hours, Sinclair's firm announced his termination. His name was scraped from the website, peeled off the etched glass doors of the lobby. Within 1 week, 3 of his largest corporate clients, collectively several $1 million in annual fees, quietly switched representation. Within 1 month, the state bar suspended his license indefinitely. 3 months after that, at a formal disciplinary hearing, he was disbarred permanently. And on the same morning the disbarment came down, the district attorney's office filed felony charges against him for conspiracy to commit forgery. He faced up to 5 years in prison. He put out eventually to avoid trial. 6 months after that, his wife filed for divorce. His lakeside home was sold to pay the legal fees of his own defense. Hollister Heritage Holdings did not survive much longer. A federal probe opened within 30 days. Reginald Hollister was indicted alongside his former counsel. Margaret Whitfield was reinstated at her firm in full. A year later, she opened her own practice. The first case she took free of charge was for an elderly black widow in another county whose property had been targeted by a developer. She won. And then there was Nathaniel Brooks. The morning after the trial, the courthouse clerk walked into the offices of the State Judicial Conduct Commission carrying a single well-worn notebook. 143 pages. Each page a date, a sentence, a witness. 3 years of small cruelties on the bench, all of them in Harrison Wakefield's voice. The day Wakefield called Ulysses a black kid in his uncle's suit was the day Brooks decided to deliver it. The commission opened its review within 60 days. 3 months later, Wakefield was quietly forced into early retirement on the condition that he avoid prosecution for a pattern of racial bias. He never sat on a bench again. Nathaniel Brooks, 3 years a clerk in that same courthouse and 28 before that, was promoted to chief clerk of the county within a month. The drawer beside his desk no longer needed a private notebook. As for Ulysses, the letters started arriving within a week. Yale, Harvard, Stanford, 3 different state attorneys general. A federal judge retired who had read the front page story over breakfast. He answered most of them politely. He turned most of them down. He had 5 years of high school left. He wanted to live like a child, at least on weekends. In Eleanor's kitchen, a new frame went up beside the framed juror's doctor. It held the front page of the Maple County Record. The headline said, "How a 13-year-old Ended a 30-Year Career." 3 months later, Sunday morning, the porch at 1018 Maple Heights smelled of coffee and pine needles. Eleanor Daniels, 78 years old, the woman who had raised a Supreme Court of 1, sat on the wooden swing her grandfather had built in 1953. She wore her good blue dress. The wood beneath her had held 3 generations. Ulysses sat beside her, plain t-shirt, jeans, sneakers untied, a cup of cocoa cooling on the railing. In his lap, the worn paperback of Gideon's Trumpet he had been reading the morning the case began. He had finally reached the last page. He closed the book. In the mailbox at the end of the walk, a thick envelope had arrived overnight. The return address read Harvard Law School. Ulisses had not opened it. There was no hurry. The book was finished. The morning was new. He leaned back into the swing. The wood creaked under him the way it had creaked under Ulisses Daniels in 1953. The way it had creaked under Howard Daniels coming home from Vietnam. The way it had creaked under every Daniels who had ever held that piece of land long enough to say, "This is ours." Eleanor reached over and laid her hand across her grandson's. She did not say anything. In the kitchen behind them, 3 frames hung side by side on the wall above the toaster. The first was a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1952. A tall man at the defendant's table, frayed collar shirt, crooked tie, Ulisses Daniels. The second was a black and white portrait from 1968, a young Marine in dress blues, Howard Daniels. The third was a color photograph from the previous spring. A boy of 12 in cap and gown holding a jurist doctor degree in 2 hands, too small for it. Ulisses Daniels. 3 generations, 3 rooms, 3 moments when a black voice had been told to sit down and refused. Outside the 50-year-old house at 1018 Maple Heights stood exactly where it had always stood. It would stand for 50 years more. There is a 13-year-old boy somewhere in this country right now whose hand is shaking on a school bus because someone called him a name and he is not yet old enough to know how to answer it. There is a grandmother somewhere praying very quietly that the world will believe in her grandchild before it tries to break him. There is a courtroom clerk somewhere with an empty notebook in a drawer beside his desk, watching something he should not be watching, waiting for one good reason to finally write it down. Real ability does not vanish under prejudice. It only waits for the room to grow up. The boy in this story has a name, Ulisses Daniels. He was 13 years old when he stood at a lectern in a wood-paneled courtroom in Maple County and ended a 30-year career in 10 minutes. He was older in that 10 minutes than the prejudice that had tried to keep him silent. If this story moved you, take one moment, hit the like button. It is small and it is free, and it tells the platform that stories like Ulisses Daniels deserve to be seen. Share it with someone who has been told they are too young or too quiet or too anything to take up the space they were standing in. Subscribe to the channel. Next week, there is another story coming. Another room that did not see it coming. Because somewhere right now there is another child in a borrowed suit in a hallway too big for him, holding a wooden cross in one pocket and a stranger's clean handkerchief in the other. He does not know yet that the room is going to grow up. But it will. You know what stuck with me after I finished telling this story? It wasn't the covering. It wasn't even the verdict. Is worth a handkerchief nobody noticed handing a clean white square to a 30-year-old kid covered in coffee, no words, just here. And I think that's the part we miss when we tell story like this one. We focus on the takedown, the viral moment, the 10 minutes that ended a 30-year career. But Ulisses didn't walk into that courtroom alone. He walked in carrying a Uton cross from his grandmother, a handkerchief from a stranger, a newspaper clipping from a great-grandfather he never met. Real family is built on love, not blood. And real ability doesn't disappear under pressure. We just wait quietly, patiently for the room to grow up enough to hear it. Maybe you have been the kid in the oversized suit, underestimated, dismissed, told to sit down before you even spoke. Or maybe you have been the janitor, the one who saw it happening and quietly handed someone a handkerchief. So here's what I want you to remember. Your boss would never have a vote in that room. If this story moved you even a little, hit that like button. It really does have this story. Find the people who need them. Share this with someone who's been told they were too young, too quiet, or to anything. And sub-right, because next week there is another story coming. Another room that won't see is coming. I will see you here.